cried Dan, and Harvey whimpered in sympathy. "About 5 year," said Disko, in a shaking voice. "Then I have been a charge on some one for every day of that time. Who was the man?" Disko pointed to Salters. "Ye hain't! Ye hain't!" cried the sea farmer, twisting his hands together. "You've more'n earned your keep twice told, and there's money owin' you, Penn, besides half o' my quarter share in the boat, which is yours for value received." "You are good men. I can see that in your faces, but Mother have mercy!" whispered Long Jack. "And he's been wid us all these trips. He's clean bewitched." A schooner's bell struck up alongside, and a voice hailed through the fog: "Oh, Disko! Heard about the Jennie Cushman?" "They have found his son," cried Penn. "Stand you still and see the salvation of the Lord." "Got Jason aboard here," Disko answered, but his voice quavered. "There warn't anyone else?" "We've found one, though. Run acrost him snarled up in a mess o' lumber that might ha' been a foc'sle. His head's cut some." "Who is he?" The We're Here's heartbeats answered one another. "Guess it's young Ollie," the voice drawled. Penn raised his hands and said something in German. Harvey could have sworn that a bright sun was shining upon his lifted face, but the drawl went on. "Say, you fellers guyed us considerable t'other night." "We don't feel like guying any now," said Disko. "I know it, but to tell the honest truth, we were kinder driftin' when we run agin young Ollie." It was the irrepressible Carrie Pitman, and a roar of unsteady laughter went up from the deck of the We're Here. "Hadn't you 'baout well send the old man aboard? We're runnin' in fer more bait and ground tackle. Guess you won't want him anyway, and this blame windlass work makes us short handed. We'll take care of him. He's married my woman's aunt." "I'll give you anything in the boat," said Troop. "Don't want nothin', 'less maybe an anchor that'll hold. Say, young Ollie's gettin' kinder balky and excited. Send the old man along." Penn waked him from his stupor of despair, and Tom Platt rowed him over. He went away without a word of thanks, not knowing what was to come, and the fog closed over all. "And now," said Penn, drawing a deep breath as though about to preach, "and now" the erect body sank like a sword driven home into the scabbard. The light faded from the over-bright eyes. The voice returned to its usual pitiful little titter. "And now," said Pennsylvania Pratt, "do you think it's too early for a little game of checkers, Mr. Salters?" "The very thing! The very thing I was going to say myself," cried Salters promptly. "It beats all, Penn, how you get on to what's in a man's mind." The little fellow blushed and meekly followed Salters forward. "Up anchor! Hurry! Let's quit these crazy waters!" shouted Disko, and never was he more swiftly obeyed. "Now what in creation d'ye suppose is the meaning of that all?" said Long Jack, when they were working through the fog once more, damp, dripping, and bewildered. "The way I sense it," said Disko, at the wheel, "is this: the Jennie Cushman business comin' on an empty stomach." We saw one of them go by," sobbed Harvey.
"And that, o' course, kinder hove him outer water. Julek runnin' a craft ashore hove him right out, I take it, to rememberin' Johnstown and Jacob Boiler and such like reminiscences. Well, consolin' Jason there held him up a piece, same as shorin' up a boat. Then, bein' weak, them props slipped and slipped, and he slided down the ways, and now he's water-borne agin. That's how I sense it." They decided that Disko was entirely correct. "'Twould ha' broke Salters all up," said Long Jack, "if Penn had stayed Jacob Boilerin'. Did ye see his face when Penn asked who he'd been charged on all these years? How is it, Salters?"
"Asleep. Dead asleep." "Turned in like a child," Salters replied, tiptoeing aft. "There won't be no grub till he wakes, natural. Did ye ever see such a gift in prayer? He everlastingly hiked young Ollie out o' the ocean. That's my belief. Jason was tur'ble proud of his boy, an' I mistrusted all along 'twas a judgment on worshippin' vain idols."
"There's others just as sot," said Disko.
"That's different," Salters retorted quickly. "Penn's not all caulked, an' I ain't only but doin' my duty by him." They waited, those hungry men, 3 hours, till Penn reappeared with a smooth face and a blank mind. He said he believed that he had been dreaming. Then he wanted to know why they were so silent, and they could not tell him. Disko worked all hands mercilessly for the next 3 or 4 days, and when they could not go out, turned them into the hold to stack the ship's stores into smaller compass, to make more room for the fish. The packed mass ran from the cabin partition to the sliding door behind the foc'sle stove, and Disko showed how there is great art in stowing cargo so as to bring a schooner to her best draught. The crew were thus kept lively till they recovered their spirits, and Harvey was tickled with a rope's end by Long Jack for being, as the Galway man said, "sorrowful as a sick cat over what couldn't be helped." He did a great deal of thinking in those dreary days, and told Dan what he thought, and Dan agreed with him, even to the extent of asking for fried pies instead of hooking them. But a week later the two nearly upset the Hattie S. in a wild attempt to stab a shark with an old bayonet tied to a stick. The grim brute rubbed alongside the dory begging for small fish, and between the 3 of them it was a mercy they all got off alive. At last, after playing blindman's buff in the fog, there came a morning when Disko shouted down the foc'sle,
"Hurry, boys! We're in town."
End of chapter.